Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating, microscopic true crime story that takes place right inside the human body. We're looking at carcinogenesis, the exact biological process of how a completely normal, healthy cell goes rogue and transforms into cancer. It's a wildly complex journey of mutation, survival, and rebellion. And today, we're going to break down the exact steps these cells take to pull off this biological heist.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by decoding what cancer actually means, then look at its prime cellular targets. From there, we'll see how a cell gets hot-wired, how it fuels, spreads, and hides, and finally, how you can control your biological risk. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Decoding cancer's true meaning. Before we can track our rogue cell, we've got to establish what we're actually looking for at the scene of the crime. Let's decode the terminology.
We hear the word tumor all the time, right? But historically, stemming from its Greek roots, it just means a swelling. You could get a swelling from a totally standard inflammation or injury, but in the context of oncology, a tumor describes a neoplasia, neo meaning new, and plasia meaning growth. So it's literally a brand new, unprompted cluster of cells and connective tissue. But here's the kicker. A tumor isn't inherently cancer.
There is a stark, absolute difference between a benign growth and a malignant one. Benign tumors, they pretty much stay put. They're well encapsulated, they grow slowly, and under a microscope, their cells actually look like the neighboring tissue. But malignant tumors, those are our true rogue cells. Fun fact, the word cancer actually comes from the Greek word for crab, and that hits the nail on the head. A malignant tumor has this central body, but it sends out these aggressive, radiating legs to invade local tissues, mutating wildly and spreading totally out of control.
Moving on to Section 2, the prime cellular targets. So where does this rebellion actually begin? A huge question we need to answer is why we get skin or colon cancers so often, but you almost never hear about heart muscle cancer.
Well, it all comes down to how frequently your cells replicate. Your body basically has three main states for tissues. First, you have permanent tissues, think neurons or skeletal muscles. These are essentially turned off. They don't replicate, meaning mutations are incredibly rare. Then you've got stable tissues, like your liver. These are hibernating. They only replicate if they really absolutely need to. But then we have labile tissues. We're talking your skin, the bone marrow producing your blood, or the lining of your gut. These guys are constantly dividing, churning out millions of new cells every single second to replace the old ones. And naturally, every single time a cell copies its DNA, there's a chance for a typo.
So if you take just one thing away from this section, let it be this. Cancers happen where cells are constantly replicating. Biological environments with high cellular turnover are absolutely the prime targets for carcinogenesis. The more you roll the genetic dice through cell division, the higher the chance a rogue mutation slips through. That brings us to Section 3, hot-wiring the cell, and how it acquires its superpowers. Let's look at how a normal, dividing cell in one of those labile tissues actually hot-wires its own biological machinery to become a malignant cancer cell.
Now, cancer is wildly diverse. We're talking thousands of genetic variations. But researchers have pinpointed core traits that virtually all malignant cells share. There's a handy mnemonic for this, IS miasma. A miasma historically refers to a noxious or toxic environment, which, let's be honest, is perfectly fitting here. A rogue cell has to acquire these 8 specific superpowers, everything from becoming self-sufficient to shifting its metabolism to avoiding the immune system just to successfully become a cancer. Let's break down the foundational steps.
Think of this very first step like a hijacked car. Normally, your cells have extremely strict instructions on when to divide, and these are controlled by proto-oncogenes. But a mutation can turn these into oncogenes. This effectively jams the cell's replication gas pedal all the way to the floor. Suddenly, the cell is self-sufficient. It's telling itself to just keep growing. Naturally, the body has a backup defense, tumor suppressor genes, like the famous p53 gene, which basically act as the brakes. But in carcinogenesis, our rogue cell mutates to inhibit those suppressors. So now, the gas is totally floored, and the brakes are completely cut.
Once those brakes are gone, the rogue cell shifts its internal metabolism. Instead of making standard cellular energy, it gets incredibly glucose-hungry, focusing entirely on building the fats and proteins it needs to just pump out more cells. And then it does something literally mind-blowing. It achieves immortalization. Normal cells have a lifespan, right? They age and eventually die. But this cancer cell produces an enzyme called telomerase, which flips off its own mortality switch. It basically reverts to a state almost like an embryo, granting itself the terrifying ability to just divide and replicate forever.
All right, Section 4, Fueling, Spreading, and Hiding, the breakout. Now that we've got a rapidly dividing immortal rogue cell, it's facing a massive logistical nightmare. It needs a way to fuel its rapidly growing army and actually break out of its local environment.
As this brand new cluster of immortal cells grows, it hits a physical roadblock at about 2 millimeters in size. At this point, the cells deep inside the tumor actually start starving for oxygen and nutrients. So, to survive, the tumor triggers something called angiogenesis, the creation of brand new blood vessels. The starving cells release vascular growth factors that literally hijack the body's circulatory system. They force the body to grow new blood supply lines directly into the tumor to feed it and wash away its toxic waste. Talk about an inside job.
With a dedicated supply line now locked in, the tumor is ready for the ultimate breakout, metastasis. These rogue cells use special enzymes to literally chew right through the collagen of their local tissue's basement membrane. They dive straight into those newly formed blood vessels, clumping together with platelets to travel through your bloodstream like biological stowaways. When they finally find a new organ, say the liver, lungs, or brain, they exit the blood vessel, adapt to their new home, and trigger angiogenesis all over again to set up a secondary tumor.
Now you might be wondering, why on earth doesn't our immune system just destroy these invaders while they're floating around in the blood? Well, to survive this crossbody journey, the rogue cell throws on a biological invisibility cloak. It actively alters the antigens it projects on its surface so it's no longer recognized as a threat by the body. On top of that, it releases chemicals that actively suppress local killer T cells. It essentially sneaks right past your body's own security guards.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Controlling Your Biological Risk. While this whole microscopic heist sounds completely terrifying, a mutating, immortal, invisible cell is no joke, understanding this exact biology leads us directly to how we can prevent it. Let's talk about taking back control.
When we compare the top 5 cancers globally against those in the developed world, we see a lot of overlap. Lung, breast, bowel, and prostate cancers are incredibly common everywhere. But it's the variations, like the high prevalence of gastric cancer globally versus melanoma in the developed world, that are super revealing. They highlight just how heavy of an impact our daily environment has on accelerating those cellular mutations we just walked through.
Look, we obviously can't change our genetics or our age, and those do naturally increase mutation risks over time, but we have a massive amount of control over our environmental risk factors. Smoking exposes those labile airway cells to constant damage. Obesity isn't just about stored calories. Adipose tissue actually secretes cytokines, which are growth factors that promote chronic inflammation and push cells to divide. A low-fiber, highly processed diet totally alters your gut bacteria, creating a carcinogenic environment right in your bowel. Unprotected UV radiation literally fries the DNA in your skin cells, and chronic infections like H. pylori in the stomach cause decades of inflammation. Every single one of these factors is literally stepping on the gas pedal of cellular replication.
And this is why understanding carcinogenesis is actually so empowering. Out of those top 5 global cancers we just looked at, a massive 1 in 3, roughly 33%, can be entirely prevented simply by mitigating these modifiable environmental risk factors. Quitting smoking, protecting your skin, eating whole foods, and reducing obesity-driven inflammation directly starves potential rogue cells of the chaotic environment they desperately need to mutate. So, as we wrap up this explainer and reflect on the ISMA-SCMA hallmarks, the jammed gas pedals, the cut brakes, the invisibility cloaks, it really all comes down to the environment we provide ourselves. I'll leave you with this. Which of your daily habits are actively fighting off these microscopic rebellions, and which ones are handing the rogue cells the keys?